Chapter 2. Clara. A short while later, Clara and her family clip-clopped along London's cobblestone streets in a horse-drawn carriage. Clara watched flurries collect on the ledge of the carriage window. They passed a group of carolers serenading a mother and little girl on their doorstep. No one else would have paid attention, but Clara took note of how the mother lovingly stroked her daughter's hair. Clara sighed and turned her attention back to the trinket box resting in her lap. Though the carriage jostled, the billowy ruffles of her lavender party dress kept the delicate treasure in place. Louise had selected one of her finest gowns for Clara to borrow for Drosselmeyer's party. She'd brushed and pinned Clara's hair to perfection too. Clara patted the side of her head. Her hair felt different from how her mother used to do it, pinned a little too tightly, and her feet were uncomfortable in the high-heeled shoes Louise had insisted she wear. When her mother used to help her dress for Drosselmeyer's party, she'd always somehow managed to brush the forest of tangles from Clara's hair with the softest touch, and she'd secretly allow Clara to wear the well-worn pair of party slippers so her feet wouldn't blister. Clara would ask her mother if she looked beautiful, and her mother would answer, "Of course, my clever darling. You are beautiful inside and out, as only you can be." Clara so missed the reassuring comfort of her mother's hands, delicate but steady, the way a tinkerer's should be. Now, instead, Clara took comfort in the weight of the tool pouch she'd surreptitiously brought along. She withdrew one of her fine tweezers and began poking at the trinket box lock again. "Clara, you're bringing tools to a party?" Louise spotted her immediately. "I need to unlock this," Clara replied, maneuvering a tweezer point to the tiny keyhole. Nope, still nothing. She turned the delicate egg over in her hands and held it up to the passing lamplight for a closer look. That was when she noticed the letter D engraved in a calligraphy on the base. "Drosselmeyer, that's his signature." Clara drew in a sharp breath. If her godfather had created this, then surely he had the key to unlock it. "Here we are," Louise suddenly announced. All three children poked their heads out through the carriage windows to see the grand sight that was Drosselmeyer's stately manor, decorated in all its Christmas-time majesty. The mansion's steeple-roofed towers were draped with lush garlands, looping from balconies to buttresses. Every window was awash with the warm glow of light from within. Red and gold Chinese lanterns illuminated the path to the ornate wrought-iron gates inscribed with the Drosselmeyer's signature letter D. By now, the snow had stopped, leaving bushes and brambles frosted with shimmering ice crystals. It was like a scene from a fairy tale. Clara thought it was no wonder her mother had such a vivid imagination, growing up in a place like this, as she liked to do every year. Clara looked up to observe the nearly dozen chimney stacks lining the rooftops, each puffed away with smoke, a sign that the heart of the house was beating, like a trusted, industrious machine. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the gates. There were no servants standing duty. Instead, the gates began to open on their own. "Look at the gate!" Fritz cried in amazement. "How does it know we're here?" "Pneumatics," Clara told him. "Pneumatics?" Fritz asked. Clara leaned over next to Fritz and pointed out the window. "You see that machine back there? It's connected to the mechanical arms, which control the gate hinges. The weight of the carriage on the pad in front of the gate activates the mechanism." Fritz's eyes glowed in wonder. "Magic," he breathed. "Honestly, Clara, where do you pick these things up?" Louise asked as the family stepped down from the carriage. Clara was about to reply cheekily that she learned it from one of Drosselmeyer's books, but luckily all talk of pneumatics floated away the moment they entered the house. Drosselmeyer's estate decor could only be described with one word: eclectic. Vibrant red walls were lined with gold leaf accents and treasures from her godfather's travels all over the world. Indian tapestries, African pottery, Chinese drapes, jade dragons snaked along display alcoves, and ancient scrolls sat rolled up in decoratively painted desks and cubbies. Even the entrance to his estate was a veritable museum of continental art and oddities, which for the Christmas season had been adorned with customary bows of holly and red ribbon wreaths. It was a mixture of global riches and Christmas finery that mesmerized all who saw it. Servants took Clara's and her family's coats and promptly hung them on hooks connected to a conveyor belt. The mechanism whisked the coats off to another room deep within the manor. Whoa, Fritz breathed. White-gloved footmen stood at the doors at the great hall, announcing families as they entered. Many of the party guests had already arrived. The ballroom was alive with people mingling and dancing in their Christmas finery, sipping on port and making merry. Servants passed by carrying gold platters of pastries and champagne. Children laughed as a mechanical sleigh piled high with presents appeared to take flight thanks to 8 mechanized reindeer. And at the center of the room stood a towering Christmas tree bedecked in blazing red and gold. It was the only source of light for the entire hall, but it shone brighter than any chandelier ever could, with 1,000 tiny gaslights. Incredible, Mr. Stahlbaum murmured. Drosselmeyer never fails to outdo himself. Do you see him? Clara whispered to Fritz, scanning the crowd. Drosselmeyer? Fritz asked. No. Wait, is that him? He pointed to a tall man with a shock of frizzled gray hair, who was quickly disappearing among the throngs of guests. You're right, Clara said. With that, she slipped away from her family, ducking past the footmen and in among the tightly packed people. She faintly heard her family members' names announced, including hers, but she didn't have time for introductions. She was on a mission from her mother. A few partygoers cast her disapproving looks when she accidentally stepped on their toes before she finally caught up with the gray-haired man. Godfather? She asked, touching him on the sleeve. The man turned, and Clara's face fell. It was a ruddy-faced guest wearing an ill-fitting hairpiece that, in the candlelight, resembled Drosselmeyer's hair. It was not her godfather, after all. Oh, I beg your pardon, she said. The man looked at her quizzically before walking away. Clara sighed. It wasn't like her godfather to be away from the celebration.
Guess what, Mommy? We already colored these ones.
Awesome.
To color the next picture tomorrow.
Okay.
So I'm going to put these in here.
Yep.
Okay.
He was always a gracious host.
I only have 2 more left.
Good.
Then I'm going to have some more coloring books. And remember, give me my coloring books.
Yes.
After I color these ones first.
Okay. He was always a gracious host, regaling guests with fascinating stories from his travels abroad. Where could he be? She was about to resume her search when suddenly someone spoke behind her. May I have this dance? Clara turned. It was her father, his hand outstretched. Oh, I'm a terrible dancer, Papa, Clara insisted. She was being truthful. Clara loved music, but she always seemed to trip over her own 2 feet during a waltz. So am I, Mr. Stahlbaum grinned. We'll make the perfect couple. Still, Clara hesitated. Please? Mr. Stahlbaum asked hopeful. Just one. It's Christmas. Clara gave in and nodded. She took her father's hand, and he led her to the dance floor. But the moment the string quartet started up the next waltz, Clara felt a tightness in her chest again. The tune was much, much too familiar, haunting and beautiful, and more than she could bear. Huh?
I need to go get my Cheeto.
Okay. Her mother's favorite song. And just like that, Clara didn't want to be at the party anymore. Everyone was acting like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Her mother was gone. How could they still celebrate without her? Clara turned and raced up the nearest staircase. Clara, my dear, wait, Mrs. Stahlbaum pleaded. But Clara didn't stop. She needed now, more than ever, to know what her mother had left for her inside the trinket box. She swept past women's ruffled skirts and brushed against men's wool suits, hopping over children's feet and turning the stair corner to the balcony that wrapped around the room. When she got to the top, she turned left through an enormous pair of double doors, leading away from the party. A few guests had wandered into this hall, but Clara hurried past them, and through another set of doors into a cool, dark library. She sighed in relief and leaned heavily against the wall. Breathe in, breathe out, she told herself. The fresh welling of sorrow from hearing her mother's favorite tune dulled. Her chest relaxed. There were no party guests here. She was alone. An owl was perched on the back of a stately chair in one corner of the room. It hooted at her, yellow eyes glinting in the moonlight from a nearby window. Clara looked at it curiously before walking on through yet another pair of doors into what she considered the most glorious room of all of Drosselmeyer's manor, his workshop. "Godfather?" Clara called. The chatter of party guests echoed faintly from the great hall, muffled by the sound of inventions whirring and clicking in the workshop. Cogs rotated and pistons pumped. Trinkets and souvenirs from all over the world lay scattered in categorized piles. Clara had always felt safe here, surrounded by well-oiled machines and the whir of gears. Here, everything made sense. The owl hooted again and glided past. It landed on a workbench on the opposite end of the room, where a man in an impeccable suit with dark skin and wild grizzled hair sat hunched. He looked up at the owl, and then to Clara as she approached. He smiled. One eye was covered with a patch, but his other eye was deep brown and kind. "Hello, Clara," he said. "I was hoping you would turn up. I can't get this darn thing working." He showed her what he was tinkering with, a complex golden model of a lake with two ceramic swans perched on top. Beneath the surface, surrounded by 4 golden pillars, was an intricate array of gears that were clearly meant to make the mechanical swans paddle their feet and flap their wings. But as Drosselmeyer flicked the model's switch, the swans flapped backward. "You probably just need to reverse the mechanism," Clara suggested. Drosselmeyer eyed her wryly. "That's what I'm trying to do, my dear. But despite there being 200 people out there, not a single one of them brought a star-shaped screwdriver." Clara rummaged through her pouch and produced the needed tool. Drosselmeyer smiled. "I knew I could count on you. Here, you try. My hands are too large to fit inside anyway." He handed Clara the machine. Without missing a beat, she began reworking the mechanism, shifting cogs and replacing gears. A moment later, she looked up. "Here, try that." Drosselmeyer flipped the switch, and this time the swan's wings flapped in the correct direction. "Brilliant, girl," he clapped. "You remind me of someone." Clara couldn't help smiling. A teacher like Drosselmeyer had a way of making you want to make him proud. "Now, young lady," Drosselmeyer continued, "why aren't you enjoying this celebration? I need your help, Godfather, with this." Clara produced the egg-shaped trinket box, and Drosselmeyer drew in a deep breath. "Ah, I made that for your mother. When we first arrived here, I hadn't a clue what to do with a little orphan girl, old man like me, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I made her this." Drosselmeyer admired the egg as though pondering a distant memory. Clara supposed he must be thinking back to all those years ago, to the day her mother had come to the Drosselmeyer estate. She'd heard the story many times from her mother, how as a very young girl, when her parents had died in a tragic fire, Marie had arrived on Drosselmeyer's doorstep in the snow with nothing but a satchel, a doll, and the clothes on her back. And now it seems she's given it to you. Drosselmeyer mused. "Interesting, don't you think?" "But without a key," Clara told him. "Really?" Drosselmeyer peered into the lock. A pin-tumbler lock. Clever Drosselmeyer. "You won't get into that with a star-shaped screwdriver." "I know," Clara said. Her voice faltered a bit. I tried. Drosselmeyer read the look on Clara's face. His own expression softened. You must miss her terribly, he said. Clara didn't say anything. She just nodded. Sometimes it helps to talk about things, Clara. Drosselmeyer handed her back the precious egg. Let the sadness out of your heart so it can mend. Clara thought about this, gazing down at her mother's beautiful, mysterious, and final Christmas gift. Bong! The grandfather clock in the great hall suddenly chimed. It began playing an extraordinary melody, unlike any typical timepiece. Drosselmeyer rose to his feet, the moment broken. It's time for the presentation of presents, he said. The guests won't be kept waiting. My dear, will you do me the honor? He offered her his arm. Clara took her godfather's arm and followed him out of the workshop. As they stepped back into the merriment of the Christmas celebration, Clara couldn't help wondering what her own mother had thought upon seeing all of this for the first time, when she had been a young girl, orphaned, all at once alone in the world. Had she felt joy, sorrow, curiosity? And she had wondered, as Clara did now, if Christmas would ever again be as magical as it had once been.